So this video is going to be about methods of level creation. I'll distinguish between handcrafted, that's making everything from scratch, like forming a sculpture out of clay, hand assembled, putting together pre-made elements, like Legos, randomly assembled, that's having the machine put together pre-made elements, and randomly generated, that's having the machine make stuff from scratch. Now, any given method of making environments may have characteristics of any of these categories. So it's a sliding scale, and these are the stages on that gradient, you're not handcrafting nor randomly generating literally everything, right? Not only for workload, but also for performance reasons and all that. Obviously, that's just either end of the scale. So why take any one of those approaches? So for handcrafted environments, you get maximum originality. That means maximum content density. By content, in this case, I mean unique artistic work for the audience to consume. Now, for the negatives, it's the maximum amount of work, right? And dense content is consumed quickly, meaning it may be too dense for the player to actually appreciate the whole thing while they're just sliding by. So there's something to be said about spreading or pacing content out in order to craft the best tension or excitement curve or narrative arc, if you will. And by narrative, I mean the whole game experience as played out with the player's input. So onto hand assembled. Now, that's less work, and the content can be spread out to craft a narrative arc, right? And you get more overall playtime, of course, which can be a good or bad thing, depending how you put it together. And also, as I said, dense content will be consumed quickly, so any individual piece of handcrafted scenery has more interest in it than just a cursory glance would provide, players sliding by. But how much though? Like, when does the chewing gum lose the flavor, right? So that's something you have to experiment with, I guess. And that stuff can be especially sad with big set pieces, like when the player has no time or reason to look or pay attention when traversing them. Now, randomly assembled. Now, this one provides the possibility for many different narratives. Again, talking narrative as in the whole game experience laid out linearly, and individual elements that are randomly assembled can still be handcrafted in every way at your disposal to be satisfying chunks of gameplay. And then the way that it is put together by the machine or shuffled around will create a different narrative, right? And for negatives, that narrative that it generates may be weirdly paced or unsatisfying, And I'll get back to that later. Now, randomly generated, in theory, provides infinite possibilities for different experiences at no extra cost in terms of workload, or so you may think. In short, you're going to end up with that dreaded ocean the depth of a puddle. So you have loads of different outcomes for random generation, but they all play very similarly. So you may get a lot of variance, but not much variety. So time to talk about my game again, because that's what's supposed to qualify me for this stuff. So I went into developing my game, Slashers Keep, with a commitment to having as much as I can randomly generated. And I found out quickly that you have to put the work in somewhere. So I had massive feature creep in adding depth to the level generation. And that made the whole thing hideously complicated and hard to expand. So again, it's like a conservation of energy thing. You have to put the work in somewhere. If you want the machine to do work as good as you can, you will have to build a human-like AI first, right? And at some point, you have to ask yourself, would players even play the same game long enough to experience all the possibilities that your level generation script can create? So I would recommend looking into randomly assembled levels first for that kind of game, such as a string of prefabs, like prefabricated areas that are arranged randomly. That would be a basic kind of level generation. And then maybe expand the system from there. And on the topic of random generation, I'll also mention technical considerations like generating light maps, which may not be possible at runtime depending on your chosen engine, right? So the actual visual representation needs to be kept in mind in all of those things, right? So for me, nowadays, in fact, for the next projects I've planned, I'm leaning towards completely pre-made levels. Maybe have some elements of randomization for replayability, like Payday, where certain level elements get swapped out to keep things fresh, and to keep the player on their toes. However, there is something to be said about completely prescribed gameplay elements too. It gives you a different kind of replayability almost. A lot of players like learning the rhythm of a linear game and learning to play through levels perfectly. That's a different kind of player though. Anyway, I often think if I'd spent all that time expanding the level generation script, just making levels by hand instead, I'd probably have like a 30-hour campaign or something. Then again, some people have put way more hours into Slasher's Keep as it is, but that's a different kind of experience, right? Harkening back to all the pretentious stuff I said earlier about content density and narrative pacing. Alright, for some examples in games. Gothic 1 and 2. In those games, the world was built by hand in 3D Studio Max, I believe, and you do get the feeling of consuming unique content anywhere you go in the world. So it does work, but at that level of detail, placing every individual vertex of the terrain isn't as big a deal as it would be in, modern games. And I played Styx Shards of Darkness, and that gave me a distinct hand-assembled vibe, which did make the levels seem kind of samey. Like one level was set on multiple airships parked next to each other, and at times I kind of lost track of where I am. But it allows for quick content creation, so you get more levels, and all the elements are very angular and accommodating to the gameplay. And that makes me think back to criticism that third-person shooters in particular got a lot. The fact that there seem to be chest-high walls everywhere that are placed conveniently in areas where you could have a nice shootout. Also, for randomly generated games, Minecraft, right? Been a long time since I played that. But I remember finding it more exciting discovering a new biome or type of terrain than exploring the randomized surface of any individual one. And that felt similar for games like Terraria or Skybound. Or, No Man's Sky is a big one. You could explore any given planet forever and never find a place that looks exactly like the other places on the planet. But, they're so similar they might as well be the same place. So it's more exciting to find a new planet with some new features. So, these methods of level generation range from something that's only a workflow issue for the developer to essentially a game mechanic that the player can be very aware of. Random generation brings its own kind of tension to the gameplay. So in a way, you're playing against the level generation AI as much as the other obstacles in the game, right? It's like a meta opponent. Anyway, what was the point of this? I guess you should be aware of the pros and cons of the method you're applying, and that there's tangible value to the work you put in. Players will recognize and appreciate handcrafted, that is, unique content. You'll just have to be careful how you present it in your game to get the most bang for your buck. Random generation is a tool with unique benefits, but as it stands, it's not a shortcut or a replacement for artistic work that you put in. But the random generation script itself is its own artistic work as well, right? So be judicious in your application of any method you apply, including random generation. So consider bang for your buck, workflow, project management, efficiency, etc. Here's an ad for my game. Slasher's Keep is a first-person roguelike with a focus on melee combat and loot. It has randomly generated dungeons with orcs, mole rats, and other monsters to fight, lots of loot to find, and a drag-and-drop weapon crafting system. I made it all by my lonesome, and it's available for PC on Steam.